Hello and welcome to today's webinar, 5 Kubernetes Trends in the Enterprise. This event is produced by Actual Tech Media and presented in partnership with our friends at Kasten by Veeam. Thanks so much for being on the webinar today. We've got a great event lined up for you here. Kubernetes and cloud native architectures, these are a hot topic in the world of technology today. I'm going to be actively tuning into this one. I'm going to be taking notes. I hope that you will as well. This is an exciting topic, and we've got 2 really exciting presenters as well. Now, before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the webinar today. Starting off with some information here about our agenda and questions. I should first mention, I suppose, my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator and host today. We always want these events to be educational. I know many of you out there still have a lot of questions, as do I, about cloud native architectures and Kubernetes and containers. And so this is a great opportunity to help get those answers to your questions. We encourage you to use the questions pane there in your audience console. Many of you have already said hello and good afternoon. We appreciate that, but we also want your technical questions. We even have a best question prize today to help maybe further encourage some questions. If you have questions, especially about how the Kasten solution helps to protect Kubernetes architectures and containers, make sure that you ask those questions. We also have a ton of resources there today. In the handouts tab, there's a link to an analyst report, a special blog, a link to learn Kubernetes for free. I'm going to check that one out. The free trial of Kasten K10, I'm going to check that out as well. There's a white paper. Make sure that you check out those resources before you go. At the end of the webinar today, I'll be announcing the winner of the Amazon $300 gift card prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, that drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our best question prize today for an additional Amazon $50 gift card. This one going out to the person who asked the best question. That means that you have to ask a question to be entered into the prize drawing. We'll be selecting those prize winners after the event. And of course, you must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. All right. With that housekeeping information out of the way, it's now my pleasure to bring in and welcome today's expert presenters. Welcome to Adam Berg, who is a solutions architect in cloud native technology partnerships at Kasten by Veeam, and Matt Bader, who is a principal Kubernetes native solutions technologist, also at Kasten by Veeam. Adam and Matt, it's great to have you on. I'll hand it off to you. Take it away.
Okay, I think let's go ahead and get started. So hi all. Again, today's webinar is called Kubernetes Top Trends for 2023. My name is Adam Berg, and I am part of the product management team here at Kasten by Veeam, and I run technical partnerships and solution architectures. I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Mr. Matt Bader. Matt, why don't you go ahead and say hello to everyone?
Esteemed Adam, you're so kind. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Bader, also part of the Kasten product team. I do both stuff and things here, primarily focused on technical enablement.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So let's start off with a bit of a housekeeping session here. First slide. We want everyone to know that this is an interactive session for everyone. So please fire those questions into the Q&A. We'll be answering those questions live in chat. We'll also take your best questions at the end via voice. There'll be some poll questions throughout, so stay sharp. We're definitely going to want your feedback during the session here with our poll questions. And oh yeah, there's going to be a $200 gift card giveaway at the end of the session. So you're going to want to stick around all the way to the end. You do have to be present at the end of the session for that gift card. And of course, we are recording the session. You will get a copy of the slides, so don't worry about that. They'll be coming out shared via email after the session. So, all right, Matt, why don't we go ahead and get started, shall we?
Sounds great.
So I want to just quickly level set, if you're new to one of our webinars, a Kasten-based webinar. So we are, of course, with Kasten by Veeam. Just a little bit about our organization and what we do. So Kasten is all about Kubernetes. We're a group of cloud native experts. We're developing the best-in-class tools for solving a lot of the day-to data management challenges that organizations are having into the journey to taking their critical applications into Kubernetes and modernizing their applications. So we do three things really, really well. We do backup and restore for Kubernetes applications. We do full disaster recovery for Kubernetes clusters here at Kasten. And we also do application mobility. So taking those complex applications, being able to move them between clouds, being able to move them between on-premises Kubernetes distributions to other infrastructure, other clouds. So we're all about application mobility for Kubernetes applications. So that's just a little bit about who we are and what we do here at Kasten. So let's go ahead and get started. Matt, you want to go take it away here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I figure we've talked a little bit about what we do. Let's do just a real quick level set, for some of the folks that might still be new to this space on just, how did we get here? Why does any of this matter, right? I think, okay, starting out, everyone was pretty familiar with what the traditional client server model looked like in computing, right? And having more or less a single application being aligned to a single piece of hardware. Fast forward to early 2000s and VMware primarily, or the advent of server virtualization, really let us start packing in more density on servers, gaining more efficiencies that way. We've learned a lot of management lessons over that period of time, but applications really didn't change all that much, right? They're still fairly monolithic. I might have a web tier or some sort of middleware tier and a database tier, but still pretty straightforward.
I think one of the biggest challenges, in this sort of model, Matt, is there was an operating system for every application, right? And that's, those are pretty heavy, sort of things to maintain. Security postures, maintaining patches and security for all the different Windows operating systems, all the different various Linux operating systems that might be virtualized on top of these platforms as being a particular challenge, right, with this model?
Absolutely. Whether you were a Windows server admin, a Linux server admin, or both, I think a lot of us still bear those scars. But if we fast forward to, looking around the 2014, 2015 timeframe, I think maybe people got tired of hearing from the application development group a phrase which still makes me shudder. Well, it runs on my machine fine, right? Like, I don't know why this doesn't work in production. It runs here fine. And containerization was a way of addressing this problem, where we were essentially now abstracting the applications and other libraries required for that code to run away from the operating system itself. So now I could have instead of a server with many, individual VMs running individual operating systems on top, I could have a server running a single operating system, but then having this layer of isolation to be able to run in a very portable fashion all of these individual containers on top of it. And it really started changing how it was, we built and then deployed our applications. That monolithic model really started to get split up into, what we'll typically refer to as microservices, right? So instead of having a single web tier of an application, I might have some, let's say I'm talking about an e-commerce app. I could have a service that's only responsible for my cart, a service that's responsible for search, and so on and so forth. And this allowed different teams to work on these different components without the fear of breaking anyone else's code, and really helped increase that ability around agility to deliver changes and build new applications. But it also created its own management problems. And what you talked about with server virtualization, now having all of these additional management points of operating systems, I think early in containerization, organizations had a hard time getting their arms around, going from 2 or 3 components to an application to potentially hundreds of components, and how do I manage those pieces? And that's really where we have seen in the last several years the rise of Kubernetes as being really the industry standard, de facto standard for managing containers, whether that's on top of bare metal, on top of virtualized environments, or even in the public cloud, that just gives us additional tools for automating the delivery and deployment of these containers. And if we talk a little bit about, again, just the why around all of this, is in this move towards containerization, we typically refer to this as shift left, right? Where we are shifting left earlier in the development process, considerations of infrastructure and infrastructure management, things that, wouldn't necessarily have been considered until I've got an MVP of my application and I think about where it is I'm going to run it. This is a very much an ongoing process that starts to pull developers towards the world of infrastructure management, and infrastructure management towards the world of development. So whether we call that DevOps, platform engineering, slightly different schools of thought, but all kind of falling under the same umbrella, right?
So yeah, I mean, I think that one of the big takeaways, from this is app modernization is the way forward for organizations. Right? It's really driving massive amounts of competitive advantage for the organizations that are embracing containerized application development. This concept of DevOps, right? It's really speeding the release of new technologies and new software and new innovation for organizations, but also reducing infrastructure costs and saving organizations money. So just a couple of quick analyst stats here that I found pretty interesting was 40% reduction in app dev related infrastructure costs, right? So infrastructure becomes cheaper, right? It's not just the speed at which we're delivering applications. Kubernetes is actually driving cost savings at the infrastructure level. Again, it's an open source technology. It's driving massive ROI, 220% ROI over 3 years, according to one study here about leveraging these new application platforms. And in this mode, we're seeing this huge ramp up in the number of developers that are embracing this, right? So 5.6 million developers using Kubernetes today. So it's no longer a niche technology. We're hitting that inflection point where it really truly is the de facto way to manage and deploy applications now is containers as managed by Kubernetes. We're seeing this massive ramp in growth, so that hockey stick level of growth.
Yeah,
so
I think there's actually another why I ran across recently in it was a Forrester total economic impact report that was specific to Red Hat OpenShift. That one of the stats that I pulled out of there was just acceleration of development 2 to 3x compared to what all of these surveyed organizations had been capable of previously. So this is talking about saving not weeks but months in labor costs for the development of each new application. So in our very much new data-driven society where every company is a technology company, that time saved is a huge benefit.
Yeah, and that's massive, right? So let's get into the meat of why we're here today, right? We want to talk about some trends, right? So let's talk about 5 big trends that we see here living in this cloud native. We live and breathe the cloud native ecosystem here at Kasten. Let's talk about what we're seeing for 2023. So let's jump right into trend number 1. We're calling this critical app readiness. Matt, why don't you take us through what we mean by this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Adam, what apps are most critical to any organization? Those are apps that hold their data, right? One of the most common things that I think we still hear on a regular basis is that, Kubernetes Kubernetes is meant for stateless applications. I think that's unfair. I think saying that Kubernetes was first developed for running stateless applications, incredibly fair. If we look at the left side of our timeline here, going back to 2015, you didn't have a lot of the controls that you needed today to really manage persistent data in a Kubernetes environment. And certainly the standards that we now see today. So one we see in there from December 2018 was the general availability of what we call the container storage interface. This is an open standard for every storage manufacturer in the world to write to a single API to let users then leverage that to deliver persistent storage into a Kubernetes environment. Things like that, adding volume snapshots to those APIs, but other controls like stateful sets that allow for, are built from the ground up with the thought of running stateful workloads, something like a database on top of Kubernetes. So these are all items that have really gained quite a bit of maturity over the last 3-4+ years. And just referring to the stat on screen there, the vast majority of organizations have only started adopting Kubernetes in an age where I would consider the platform to have been ready to run stateful workloads. And we see that.
Can we take a step back real quick?
Sure.
And can you give just a couple of examples of what do we mean by stateless applications? What are some examples there? And what do we mean by stateful applications? And what do we mean about, what does that really mean in case there's some confusion in the audience?
Absolutely. So, stateless, think about just like a web server that is pulling the same, serving the same files over and over and over again. That's not writing anything back. Right. So if I rip and replace that application and redeploy it from scratch, it's going to be the exact same thing versus a stateful application. If I've got, say, a Postgres database that I'm writing transactions into, and then I redeploy that in a Kubernetes environment, but all of that data is gone, that's a problem. So stateful workloads or the idea of supporting stateful workloads in Kubernetes has given us all of the tools we need to ensure that, yes, when I redeploy that Postgres database in this example, that all of that data is still there, right? It functions very similarly to how I might think of, delivering a data, Postgres, MySQL, Mongo, things like that in a virtual machine.
Yeah, so let's take a look at, again, some of those applications that are trending, right? On top of Kubernetes, some real world data, right?
Yeah. So this is actually based off of Datadog's container use report. So this is not survey data. This is environment data, and looking at the top kind of off of the shelf container images they see across of the tens of thousands of customers that they monitor. And so this is your top 14, 13, 14 applications we see there on screen. First one we see, web server, stateless application. But the next two, so Redis is a stateful caching layer for data. But then moving on from there, you've got Postgres is a database. Elasticsearch is a database. Kafka and RabbitMQ are stateful message queues. Mongo and MySQL, more databases. So we see actually, more and more stateful workloads, especially databases, coming into these Kubernetes environments. And again, I think the reason why is people see the advantage of running those stateless workloads on Kubernetes in terms of just the automated availability aspects of it, the ease of scaling those workloads. But if I've still got my databases that are tied to those apps running outside of my cluster, now I've got multiple different ways of having to look after that environment, right? And certainly protect that environment. So if I want to get all of the benefits, all of the value I can out of that Kubernetes environment, I want all parts of my application running on that cluster.
Yeah, no doubt. So, I mean, what's amazing about this data that we're looking at here, this is really fresh, right? This is just from the end of 2022. So this is really fresh data from Datadog. We're really seeing this massive trend of these stateful applications, really being trusted now to move into Kubernetes. And that's just going to continue to increase in 2023. Something that's really trending big, this might be on, the next year's 2024, as something that's really taking the industry by storm, and it's running virtual machines in Kubernetes. Now, we've been talking about containers, right? And Kubernetes being this container management platform. And this is sort of like mind-blowing
This feels
concept.
very counterintuitive, Adam.
Yeah, right. So I'm going to take my virtual machines and then move them into my container management platform. Like, that sounds bonkers. That's crazy, right? Not really, right? So let's talk about why someone might do this, right? So the technology behind this is called KubeVirt. Red Hat has a flavor of this called OpenShift virtualization, right? So this is the idea of actually running and managing traditional VMs, that's Windows operating systems, Linux operating systems with their applications intact. And I'm running them and managing them as if they were containerized applications. So I use the same common set of APIs to manage these traditional workloads as if they were containers, right? So a lot of organizations are saying, look, Kubernetes is the way. I want to have a single management platform for all of my applications. But the reality of it is legacy applications, a lot of older applications just can't be refactored, can't be turned into containers in an easy way. Or maybe that that process takes 12 months, takes 24 months to refactor an application, but I want to have a single common management layer, right? So we can actually take those VMs and move them into Kubernetes and consolidate the management, consolidate these workloads and treat these legacy applications as containers, right? So now I've got my legacy applications integrated into the same DevOps teams and the same management process here. It's really neat technology. I think it's still a bit early days here for this, but we're definitely seeing this in production today. And there are organizations that are running virtual machines managed by KubeVirt inside of Kubernetes as the default way of going forward now.
So just to kind of tie off on this last trend, I just want to pull it back to, obviously why Adam and I are talking about this as a platform that, protects stateful workloads on Kubernetes. As sort of an example, you can see here on the slide of what a typical stateful application within Kubernetes could look like. Again, it's not a single VM that's comprised of all of my code, all of my logic, and the data itself tied directly to it. This could be comprised of multiple different resource types, so deployments or stateful sets, secrets, services, config maps. All of the running workloads or pods spread across multiple different nodes within a cluster, and all of this is ultimately defined as code that lives in a single database. It's sitting behind the Kubernetes API server, and that's all to say that I can't just use a traditional VM or agent-based backup solution to protect these tools. I need something that's going to be able to speak directly to that Kubernetes API server, so it can extract, all of this different, these individual pieces of metadata alongside, your persistent data that's living in these what we call PVCs down in the bottom right-hand corner. But most importantly, you need that solution to be able to easily piece all of this back together. And that's not something that you're going to get with, say, taking a snapshot of my Kubernetes worker nodes with my traditional VM backup software.
Yep. So great points. Thanks, Matt. So let's move on. We got a lot of trends here. We're only on trend number 2. We're calling this trend number 2 for 2023 invisible infrastructure. So let's talk about what do we mean by invisible infrastructure?
Yeah, so just to talk about some of the different flavors with which you can run Kubernetes. We saw a lot of these reflected in the survey results. So I'm sure a lot of you are already pretty familiar here. But what I would consider on the far left to be the most difficult, but arguably also the most flexible would be upstream or what we call vanilla Kubernetes often. It's going to present the most complexity in terms of your solution design. From an infrastructure perspective, it's deployment and ongoing management. And that's probably what's driven most enterprises to adopting more of a certified distribution. So we see, common options here are like Red Hat OpenShift, SUSE Rancher or VMware's Tanzu platform. So these are, not just providing enterprise support and additional tools to ease with that deployment and management, but also adding a lot of what you would consider platform as a service type functionality that we'll get into a bit more. But then the kind of third category here, arguably the easiest to get up and running, is what I would consider to be more Kubernetes as a service or a managed service for Kubernetes. So our big three here would be like Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, Google's Elastic Kubernetes Service, EKS, or Google's Google Kubernetes Engine, GKE. I think I got all my acronyms right. Again, just to be able to get up and running so quickly. But I would say on the very far right of this as well, you could get the best of both worlds. Now if I'm looking to, take advantage of some of these PaaS features of something like an OpenShift or a Tanzu, we're now even starting to see, fully managed cloud hosted solutions for those PaaS platforms as well.
Yeah, so some of the data around this, right? So we're seeing a lot of growth, and here's just one sort of data point around one of those platforms as a service, and that's Red Hat's OpenShift, right? We're seeing a lot of adoption of this, right? And what's why we're getting a lot of adoption to the platform as a service rather than trying to roll your own or vanilla Kubernetes is you're getting this developer workflow integrated already. It's predefined, built-in, baked-in security. It's a predefined what they call an operator hub marketplace. And this is not necessarily unique just to OpenShift, but this is just one example here of what these platform as a service offerings can do for you. And then of course these also can be a managed service like Matt noted before, right? You can also run something like OpenShift as a managed service on both AWS and Azure.
So there was Adam, if you go back for just 1 second, there was a question a little earlier in chat about what are more of the things that make it easier to run stateful workloads today on Kubernetes. That operator hub marketplace is certainly we've seen as being like a secret sauce for OpenShift, right? In that stateful workloads can be somewhat more involved to architect on top of Kubernetes, but that marketplace makes it so easy to just like say, okay, I want something that's a highly available sharded MongoDB database. Point and click, I want it on this cluster, and then to have it be kind of deployed with all of these best practices baked in, and to provide you additional sort of lifecycle management tools for that database as part of that operator. That's probably one of the biggest contributors to making it, just so much simpler to run those stateful workloads today. And also why it's popular for developers, because it's it's database as a service at that point, right? I point to the thing that I want and I get it.
Yeah, good points there, Matt. And then, the tremendous growth of the managed services, right? This is the truly invisible infrastructure where, I can come in a couple of mouse clicks and I have a fully fleshed out deployed Kubernetes infrastructure completely managed by a cloud service provider, right? Right. And some of the data here, like nearly 90% of Kubernetes users are leveraging some sort of cloud managed service, right? So this is huge. This is big, right? And this is really this infrastructure that, it's sort of this on demand, right? It grows with me on demand. It shrinks with me on demand. I don't really need to think about it. All those sort of tooling is built in. So it's all about reducing operations overhead. It's all about, not having to think about infrastructure and having your concentration be solely on workloads, right? And actually delivering business value back and not having to deal with underlying infrastructure. Infrastructure truly becomes invisible at this point. And I think Kubernetes is making this much more simple than, even, things like vSphere infrastructure, or other infrastructure types that, over the years have had this sort of on-demand availability service.
Yeah.
Right. And, and this kind of comes back to, again, there's a lot of different options here. Platform as a service, managed platforms as a service on all the different cloud providers. Matt, why is it important to have your tooling understand all of these different layers?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about not locking yourself in, right? Having that flexibility to run in a, on a distribution or in a managed service that's, potentially going to present the best performance or best, economic outcome for that particular workload, which I think kind of leads us directly into our next trend, which is just the rise of adoption of hybrid multi-cloud architectures or hybrid cloud plus edge architectures. So just start again, I'm sure this is pretty well understood at this point. We'll start with some simple definitions. So what am I talking about when I talk about hybrid cloud? Typically, generally going to be some type of shared computing platform, but really spanning between multiple data centers, or ideally, your primary data center and some public cloud provider. So in this case, we see sort of OpenShift as the platform du jour in this example, but spanning across private and public cloud. Versus the multi-cloud approach is, if we're talking about really then trying to take advantage of multiple different, typically public cloud environments, right? I don't want to marry myself just to AWS or to Microsoft Azure, but I want to have a strategy where we've got fluency in both and the ability to run workloads in both, ideally with the ability to move across them, right? And if we combine all of that together, hybrid multi-cloud is probably more your panacea, right? As I want to be able to run my workloads wherever they're going to make the most sense to do so. And I think Adam, you've got some stats.
These two trends are sort of really related to each other, right? When we talk about invisible infrastructure, part of that is the hybrid cloud, is the edge, is the multi-cloud, and it's all married into one where my infrastructure is not a consideration anymore, right? I can, sort of pick the infrastructure that's ideal for my organization, or maybe it's cheaper over here, or it's, in this part of the world, it might be Google, and this part of the world might be Azure, and this part of the world might be on-prem. And I've got, end devices, end users. I got branch offices that are edge deployments, and this all becomes invisible. And my applications live where they provide the most value to the business. And this concept, this idea, is really trending up in a big way, right? Right. So some of the the industry analyst stats here, 50% of organizations are planning to increase the number of their current cloud providers, right? So this idea, like, you pick one cloud provider for life, and that's where you build your applications and you're locked in. Nobody likes to be locked in, right? You're going to see organizations picking the right cloud provider for the right sector of the business, for the right application, for the right area, the right geography, right? So multi-cloud is happening in a big way. 97% of businesses, right, are agree that their business requires a mix of cloud and on-prem, right? So no one is really going all in on public cloud 100%. No one's saying, I'm going to have everything in my own private data center. I want to control everything. Everyone sort of realizes that this idea of, I need the ability to sometimes run applications close to my end users in my own private data centers. Sometimes public cloud is the best option, right? We need to have the ability to say that actual infrastructure is invisible, it's irrelevant. I need my applications to sort of flow between where it makes sense to actually run those applications. And 88% of organizations are agreeing that hybrid and or multi-cloud strategy directly drives business results, right? So this is not just something that's nice on paper. It really is driving competitive differentiation and business value. And the other one that, this is another one that we're hearing a lot. Like we talk to a lot of our customers, a lot of the biggest global integrators out there, and they're talking about this one concept that's really trending in a massive way. And it's this idea that app monetization is actually driving this concept of sustainable data centers, right? I think we all have an idea that we need this concept of being green, but I don't think people realize how much global CO2 emissions are generated by data centers, right? Some of the estimates, range from about 2.5% to 3.7% of the share of the global CO2 emissions generated by data centers, and that's bigger than the aviation industry. It's bigger than the shipping industry. bigger than, food processing industry. I mean, this is a massive area where technology can help solve a problem that technology created, right? Which is, the problem of CO2 emissions generated by, the massive amount of computing that we're using, right? So how does containerizing your applications and driving app modernization actually affect sustainability, right? Well, it's all about efficiency, right? These cloud technologies can be more efficient, helping you to create applications that can seamlessly and freely move between data centers where maybe during one part of the year this area of the world has a greener energy supply than this part of the world, and it can seamlessly move those applications, right? So having applications that can freely move between cloud providers and freely move to on-premises data centers through invisible infrastructure concepts is a green technology. Having containerized applications that scale on demand in a seamless way, right? I no longer have to provision an application that needs to be sized for my peak workload. I can have applications dynamically scale down for when usage is light, and instantly scale up when usage is heavy, right? So I'm freeing up resources. I don't need to use extra CPU, RAM, cooling, all of those things that drive CO2 use. All of that is helped by having on-demand, cloud-native, scalable applications. And again, having the flexibility to move to greener technologies, move to greener hardware on demand and seamlessly with cloud-native applications is driving this concept of sustainability.
So I think another beyond saving the planet and the Hotel California issues that we want to be able to avoid here. Well, no, we don't want to avoid saving the planet. We do want to save the planet. Misspoke. But beyond those two topics, though, I think another one that we didn't hit on is data sovereignty too, right? Laws change in fairly real time now, and being in the position of, okay, gosh, I've got all of this application data in data center X that can no longer exist in this nation or needs to be confined within this nation is another real thing that we need to plan for in developing and deploying applications. But regardless of which one of those motivations, I think one of the promises of Kubernetes is, as that abstraction layer of containerization is so much more than we had with virtualization, the ability to easily take something that was running on-prem to run it on a public cloud service or vice versa. But that's probably only true in Kubernetes for truly stateless applications. I might be able to say I'm running a GitOps pipeline to deploy my application. Maybe I point that to a new cluster and it's now deployed on cluster B and I'm good to go. But as soon as we start, talking about those stateful workloads, which we saw from our first trend is growing, we have to overcome that kind of pesky data gravity problem, right? I'm not just redeploying application manifests. And I think, above and beyond just having to move the data alongside my application, depending on, where we're moving these things, if I'm moving maybe between different Kubernetes distributions, there might be other changes to application metadata I need to make as well, like changes to network ingress rules, or if I'm using one type of storage in cluster A and wanting to move it to cluster B that's using a different type of storage. Again, additional metadata changes that need to be made as part of that restore process in order for everything to work. So this is again where K10 is sort of bolstering, the capabilities that an enterprise has with their production Kubernetes environments to really enable that ability to move freely from cluster to cluster, managed service to managed service, distribution to distribution, and so on.
Yeah, great points. Let's keep moving. I'm looking at the time here. I want to get to all of our trends here. So Yeah, let's hustle. I want to talk about trend number 4 here, right? And this is super important, right? I think we're even changing the language around. We've been talking about DevOps for years. This is really going to be changing. We're going to be calling this like DevSecOps. Now, if you haven't heard of DevSecOps, let's talk about what we mean by that. And this is trending in a big way, right? So DevOps is really turning into DevSecOps. We're adding stands for security, right? We're integrating security practices and tools right into the software development process and not making this a separate team, a separate, post process, something that we think of as an afterthought. Security is baked in to the development process, and the security teams are invested in the security of applications pre-deployment, all the way through, the life cycle of the application, right? So this helps to identify and mitigate security risks early in the development process. It's helping to reduce costs and effort required to fix security issues. Obviously, it's cheaper to have preventative maintenance, right, than it is to fix a problem afterwards, right? It's easier to prevent a ransomware attack than it is to mitigate or solve you've already been attacked, right? At that point, there's nothing you can do. Right. So, I think people have, an idea that this is required, but this never really, was a concept until people really started integrating security into the development process. We're going to talk about some reasons why, and then, how this is being done. Right. So one of the big reasons why, right, Kubernetes is not immune to malware and ransomware. Kubernetes is an infrastructure. There's applications being run in here. There's still attack vectors. There's still 0 days. There's still malware being attacked. You still need to prevent attacks and secure Kubernetes infrastructure like you would any type of infrastructure. There's no magic. This is not a magic bullet for security here, right? There are still malware and ransomware attacks happening to applications being deployed inside of Kubernetes, and it's definitely something security teams are starting to think about in a big way here. Right. So some of these stats here around security. Matt, you want to take this one?
Yeah. Just to put some numbers on it. So this is from what was it? The latest state of Kubernetes security report. The majority of organizations concerned about securing workloads at runtime makes sense. Unfortunately, that same majority of organizations have found misconfigurations in their applications. And as a result, that same majority of organizations have had to slow down the deployment of new applications, of new features as a result. So ultimately, how does DevSecOps become a tool or a process by which, we have security staying in lockstep, keeping up with the new speed of application development and deployment? It has to be through policy, right? It can't be something that's looked at on an individual basis by individual people. It's done through something that we call policy as code. And just to pull this back to a Kasten specific example, I mean, most people probably don't think of data protection as part of their overall security posture. It's like this is a day 2 operational thing to go solve. But thinking about the shift left nature of all of this, where developers have increasing control and responsibility that are going to be related to infrastructure, we want to make sure things are protected from the outset, so we're not a victim of one of these ransomware attacks that you flagged on the previous slide. But cool thing for Kasten is everything we do, they're Kubernetes native resources. So our policies, or how we point to different storage resources, it's all custom resources on the Kubernetes cluster. And what that allows us to do is really easily integrate with some of these different policy as code solutions. So you've got things like Kyverno, or you may have heard of Open Policy Agent. And these allow you to write additional policies that are essentially enforcing compliance. So in this example we see on screen, this is more, if I were looking to integrate with my continuous integration pipeline, where at the time of code check-in, I'm also checking in some infrastructure as code, defining my Kasten policy to protect my application. and using policy as code to make sure that, okay, I have this set to the right amount of retention, or I have my export set to go to an immutable storage location, which again is going to be critical to protecting my backup data then against those ransomware attacks. So this can be done, at commit time. This could also be done, at deploy time through the Kubernetes admission controller. So again, as Kubernetes native resources, really easy to integrate your data protection with the rest of your overall security policy flow.
Great. Yep. Good. This is really important going forward, right? If your organization still is treating security as sort of a separate task or separate team, you really need to start thinking about how do we really create a DevSecOps team going forward. So let's take us to our last trend, right? So the biggest trend here that we're, this is still a big problem in this industry is building talent. I think organizations in 2023 are really going to start investing in this, in a big way, right? So let's talk a little bit about this, Matt.
Yeah, so it's probably easier at this point to find money in budgets to hire people than it is to actually find the right people to fill some of these jobs, right? We're definitely in somewhat of a drought still of real Kubernetes talent. And this is something that we see, this is one particular survey example, but I've seen this in many different places where this is the chief challenge. The good news is, I think for all of us as IT practitioners, is that organizations know that they need to invest more money in technical training programs. They need to invest resources into people in terms of, giving you the opportunities to learn, not in addition to everything else you're doing, but carving out time specifically to help you grow professionally. So those are huge wins, I think, for all of us. But maybe the last thing that we still need to consider is, with the limited amount of resources that teams might have today, with Kubernetes skills that are focused on these different types of application replatforming or digital transformation projects, that they should be spending their time focused on those workloads, your applications, the things that are helping drive revenue for your organization. We still run into a lot of teams that say like, oh, well, we can go out there and build our own data protection solution for Kubernetes. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying it will probably take you a year, 2 years plus. And isn't it better to invest that time in the things that drive revenue for your organization and identify tools that are easy to adopt, that are going to help you along that journey? Right. That may be more of a shameless plug, but it is the truth of the situation.
Here's one such tool, right? That makes this easy. So Kasten K10 again, right? So that's who we work for. I think this is one of the biggest things that we're bringing to the industry is, we just work, right? Don't spend your time trying to figure out how to secure your data, how to enable ransomware data protection, how to enable app mobility for your organization. Bring in a tool that just works, right? We know that your training budgets are better spent learning the ins and outs of the DevSecOps processes rather than building the tools to actually do the work, right? So just a bit about Kasten here before we get onto a bit of Q&A. Kasten K10, we install in minutes. We're easily available on the various app marketplaces like Operator Hub or cloud marketplaces. This is a Rancher marketplace. So really easy to deploy, full UI, so you don't need to be an expert to learn this. If you want to use it via APIs, integrate into your DevOps processes and your GitOps processes, we're fully there in delivering full role-based access control permissions in a really easy way as well. So again, take a look at this tool if you're not out there using Kasten yet today. And if you want to learn more, or get some free training for your organization, this is something that we give back to the industry here at Kasten. So Kasten has a sister project called kubecampus.io. So kubecampus.io is free in your browser, Kubernetes training, like live with real clusters, full courses around taking you through self-paced learning labs for Kubernetes, really accelerating you on your Kubernetes journey, right? This is completely free, no obligation, something that we're giving to the industry to help bring everybody up and getting everyone quickly ramped up on this transformational technology that we call Kubernetes, right? So some of the 5 lab tracks include Kubernetes principles, understanding applications in Kubernetes, understanding security in Kubernetes, understanding disaster recovery, and management and observability. So join our experts, instructors, and have some Kubernetes interaction on kubecampus.io. Go ahead and check it out. It doesn't require anything other than an email address to get started today. And then what do we have here, Matt, for everyone today?
Yeah,
as well?
so I mean, for those of you that are maybe a little bit further along that journey, I think we saw 40+% of you are running apps in production today. You are running stateful applications. So if you haven't started thinking about how you're going to protect those, there's certainly no time like the present. And we make it really easy to start kicking the tires on Kasten K10. So you can install and run for up to 5 nodes completely free, fully featured. So you can get started at that URL today. Or you're looking to run a larger scale POC, you can actually run the platform for up to 50 nodes for a 1-month period. And happy to help support you throughout that journey.
All right, great presentation, Adam and Matt. Really appreciate that. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well, and I can tell that this is a hot topic because I see over 20 questions here in the queue. So many great questions coming in. Adam, you ready for some Q&A?
Yeah, you bet. There's so many questions. I know we won't be able to get to them all, but let's take a few.
Excellent. All right, let's see. I'll just start with this one. First question here, they're asking, what really drives Kubernetes investment cost so that you can get an ROI in 3 years? What's your take, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, so what's really driving the move to Kubernetes, obviously, is you're going to see a massive ROI cost in infrastructure. And it's the way that, what defines a cloud native application is by nature, these applications, not only are they're lighter weight in general and they use less infrastructure, but they should have some element of scalability built into them. Meaning that in a traditional, I call a legacy application, you typically have to provision, the max amount of CPU and RAM to meet peak workload and peak demand for that application. The way that cloud native application should be built is that they scale and use, that's really the power of Kubernetes, is the built-in scalability nature of how it scales applications on demand. So you end up lowering your infrastructure costs overall by refactoring your applications into, next generation cloud native containerized application will drive a lot of ROI savings in overall infrastructure spend. The other big savings here in terms of ROI is synergizing the teams and having more investment in, or more visibility of the infrastructure into more teams. So when we start talking about DevOps and DevSecOps, these teams are actually invested in how their applications interact with the underlying infrastructure. They're not just building a VM and tossing it over the wall to the virtualization team. They're actually developing their applications with Kubernetes and scalability in mind, right? So the efficient use of infrastructure is now sort of everyone's responsibility, and that overall is driving massive ROI savings for organizations.
Very nice.
Go ahead and you'll find this. You'll find a lot of that. Just search out ROI savings for Kubernetes, and you'll see a lot of the reasons for those in a lot of the most recent data that's out there.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, it sounds like it could help a lot of companies out there. Next question, Victoria's asking, how does Kubernetes simplify containerized deployments?
Yeah, I mean, this is great. And this is sort of, the why of Kubernetes, or why, a lot of organizations are convinced that they want to containerize their applications, but they're not, they don't understand Kubernetes, or why is everyone sort of talking about what Kubernetes is? So Kubernetes gives a common set of APIs that will manage not only the deployment of containers at scale and the things like scalability, but also the interaction between Kubernetes, the security around the containerized access, the role-based access controls, right? The integration into the deployment of the applications, the DevOps processes. So it's this common API that integrates all the capabilities, is really the driving factor of why why Kubernetes, right? Just like we needed something like vSphere to handle the scalability and deployment of virtual machines at scale. You need a management tool like Kubernetes that handles the networking interaction, the security interaction, the interaction into developers and deployment processes and DevOps tools like GitOps. And it's really that common set of APIs that is the real advantage of something like Kubernetes.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah, you can run a VM, but that's not going to be enterprise grade. So you need vSphere, and like you said, you can run a container, but it's not going to be enterprise grade, without something like Kubernetes on top. So, great analogy.
100%.
Another
Exactly.
good question here. Jack is asking, what's the greatest challenge or problem that companies are facing around Kubernetes and cloud native?
Yeah, and the way I understand this question is what is slowing adoption of Kubernetes? And we touched on this a little bit during the presentation in some of our trends. Number one, I think it's much more difficult to refactor legacy applications into cloud native or a container than I think most organizations realize. So what you're finding is that a lot of organizations have decided, hey, we're gonna containerize. It's the future. Kubernetes is the future. Then they take a look at all their applications and say, we don't know what to do with these things. We don't know how to refactor these applications, and it's taking much. It's a much bigger task than we realized. Or changing from, let's say, a Microsoft SQL legacy database platform to something that's more cloud native, like a Mongo database platform, is much more difficult than they realize. So those kinds of things are slowing adoption of Kubernetes. And then the other one is the skills gap. We touched on it in our trend number 5. The skills gap around Kubernetes is real. Organizations are finally getting the idea that they can't just hire external experts. They're going to have to retrain their existing staff, right, in cloud native, in Kubernetes. It's time to really invest in your teams and your staff to retrain them to be ready for the next level of infrastructure, right? So combined with these two things, those are the primary things that are slowing more widespread adoption of Kubernetes. But both of those challenges are being tackled head on, and I think you're going to see an exponential growth of Kubernetes going forward.
Excellent. Great point. The skills gap. Gilbert, my friend in South Carolina, wants to know how much of the Kubernetes state or metadata is examined and backed up for restore with Kasten.
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest challenges with protecting the next generation of these applications as deployed on Kubernetes. They are completely unlike any other application type. They're not like VMs. They're not even like EC2 instances or other sort of cloud native or cloud deployed workloads. Kubernetes applications are much more complex. So any sort of existing or legacy data protection tool is wholly inappropriate for complete data protection here. You need a tool that is actually integrated into the Kubernetes API to be able to discover all the pieces that make up an application. So it's not just the pods or the containers themselves. There's all the ancillary pieces of metadata that make up an application. Things like secrets, things like stateful sets and deployment configurations, the networking configurations. There's what we call PVs or PVCs. That's the actual stateful data that can be mounted to the containers. So you need a tool that actually is speaking and talking to the Kubernetes API to discover all those pieces, to make sure that everything that makes up an application is discovered and then protected, so that when you actually recover an application, you're recovering it in its entirety, piecing it all back together, right? And that's the biggest challenge. And I think that's what makes the Kasten product so unique, is that we are a Kubernetes application ourselves. We deploy in your Kubernetes cluster. We integrate into the Kubernetes API. We discover any changes to applications in real time using native Kubernetes APIs. So I think a tool like this is almost a requirement for deploying applications there, because you can't just take your traditional backup pointed at your application and think that you're going to be fully protected. Right. So a tool that can guarantee that the full protection of the application and all the pieces is definitely critical to maintaining data availability, business continuity. Right. So keep that in mind once you start putting critical business data into Kubernetes, that you need something that is native to Kubernetes inside that protection zone.
Great point. And I bet a lot of folks don't always consider that when they start moving to Kubernetes. So I encourage everyone to check out the handouts tab there. There are a ton of resources. There's a link to try Kasten K10 for free. There's a link right there to learn Kubernetes for free. I already visited the link myself, and I'm signing up for this training, kubecampus.io. What a great free resource. Yeah, from Kasten. So I encourage everyone to check out the handouts. And Adam and Matt, really great presentation, great discussion. Thank you so much for being on the webinar today. And of course, thank you to our friends over at Kasten by Veeam. And I hope that everyone has a great day. Oh, and some of you might be wondering, hey, who won that Amazon $300 gift card? Well, the answer to that is Abhishek Das. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. Abhishek Das from Nebraska. Congratulations. We will be reaching out to you. We'll be also reaching out to to our best question prize winner, to one of the many folks who asked great questions on the event today. Thank you for all the great questions. And don't forget to try out Kasten for yourself. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.